Hi everyone, right, we've got some new information about Lucy, and it comes from the old court case, but this is different. We're not just going to have a look at what all the witnesses said. This is actually what the judge said, and a lot of it ties in with other stuff, and you can make up your own minds about who's telling the truth and who isn't, but this really is quite interesting. So as you can see, they're talking about the lone Asian elephant Lucy and the judges involved in the case. And just so you remember, in 2005, page 36, Edmonton laid down that Lucy is staying for no other reason than to be an icon and to make the zoo more profits. She could go away, she could enjoy the company of other elephants. Just before we get to the court bit, I'll just show you this as well. Look at the date, 18th of November 2005. You can just see it here. She's an amazing gentle giant. And where are we? Archibald said she's healthy and fine, and as long as she remains that remains the case, I expect she'll remain at the Valley Zoo. So it's not that she's healthy and fine, you know, she's going to be on her own and suffer, so let's get to the sanctuary because she's fine and healthy. It's she can stay here as long as she's fine and healthy. But either way, there's no talk about sending her away because she is the zoo icon. Why does that matter? It matters because in 2007, 18 months later, they're saying that Lucy cannot be transported. How did that happen so quickly after being fit and healthy and fine? Now, the application is supported by a number of veterinarians and zoo directors, and those are the big reports we've looked at before that say that Lucy can travel and she is suffering. And we've got, I don't know if you remember, we went over all these old records that said, oh look, depressed, very needy, wouldn't eat, lines and circles. Amazing how well she works when she's hungry. She did not want to go out today. She was grumpy and not listening. TV filming today. She was good. Right hip stiff going down slopes. Scanning to receive 3 scoops of buzone, whatever that is. The inside lobe of her right ear is reddish and more swollen than the other one. Small bit of popsicle hit a nerve and hurt her. Right, so all that's going on. Mucus on body all over. Tooth bothering her. She hardly touched her hay. TV filming. Right, so you can see what the priorities are. Right, so let's move on to the next bit of this because it's quite interesting. So we've just seen Lucy's own medical record saying that she is not well, and yet she's still being used for TV filming and other stuff. Then we go on to the court record for the purposes of the Act. So this is the Animal Protection Act. An animal is in distress if deprived of adequate shelter, ventilation, space, food, water, veterinary care, or reasonable protection from injurious heat or cold. Lucy's had frostbite. Now, how did that happen when they're all taking such good care of her, I wonder? There we go, pushing a truck. There's the bull hook. Lucy hates our winters. The zoo showed off that statement themselves. What else did they do when Lucy arrived? That's what they did to her. If only you've ever seen any of the real elephant sanctuaries, particularly one in Kenya, you see how they treat baby elephants. They certainly don't use bull hooks, and they certainly don't ride them. That's poor Lucy undergoing the crushing process where they tied her, winched her for a week, and she suffered. And this is something someone gave me. The City of Edmonton Junior Journal 1978 says it only took a week for Lucy to become comfortable. But when they wanted her to lie down, they had to use a winch and force her. So this isn't a great secret. The local press is reporting what they did to Lucy. So if we read this, injured, sick, in pain, suffering, that's the law. And then we look at what's happened to Lucy. Right, so this is why people felt so strongly to try and bring a court case. And this was decades ago. I mean, this was in 2010. And what's changed? That's a recent picture of Lucy. Look at that. That little that metal prong on her sore feet. Right. But just because there's a law doesn't mean anybody's going to do anything about it. As it say here, the Act restricts and controls the activities of persons. It does not create rights in animals. And that's a really big point. The Act also authorises the approval of humane societies or independent agencies, although they did get government funding. And it does say in these reports somewhere, how can it be an independent agency if they receive government funding? The city brought an application to have the original notice struck out on the basis that applicants have no standing. So it's interesting that the city were not too interested in reading all the reports by the vets and maybe diving deep into, you know, what could improve Lucy's well-being. They were more interested in just, you know, getting it all stopped. So there's all this stuff about, did the Chamber's judges, you know, make the wrong decision, the right decision, a number of issues not raised or argues, and all the legal stuff goes on and on and on. But the judge was really savvy. And they did raise the fact it's unnecessary to deal at length with the evidence filed by the appellants about Lucy's health or Lucy's care and its adequacy. These are not issues present before the court. So then again, we might just stop reading this and think, okay, well, that's it. However, further, the evidence has not yet been tested by cross-examination. It's not been rebutted by the respondent. It would be both unfair and unsafe to draw conclusions about Lucy's care at this time. So then it starts to get a little bit more interesting. So that's abuse of process information. And then this was a surprise. I didn't expect all this to be in the judge's thing. And they really go into the animal welfare stuff quite heavily. It's very impressive. An elephant is a social animal. Thus, according to experts and zoo standards, elephants, especially females, should not be kept alone. This appeal involves Lucy, a 36-year-old Asian elephant. Now, this is interesting. She arrived at the Edmonton Valley Zoo. Oh, that's a picture of Lucy with the wildfire smoke at the back. Very good. When she was only 2 years old. So when she arrived, when she was captured from a wild herd and sold by a wildlife dealer via the Pinwala orphanage, then if you remember the pictures of baby Lucy, that's what happened to her when she arrived. So what's happened? It's been alleged since then Lucy's been housed by herself at various times, most recently for 4 years. It's also alleged that the size and structure of the shelter in which Lucy has been confined for years failed to comply with the city's obligations at law. Now, we've heard this a lot on social media. You know, she's being kept in unlawful, inhumane conditions, and that these deprivations have caused or aggravated a number of Lucy's long-standing health problems. Some may consider this appeal and the claims on behalf of Lucy inconsequential, perhaps even frivolous. They would be wrong. And the judge has said that. Lucy's case raises serious issues, not only about how society treats sentient animals, those capable of feeling pain and thereby suffering in human hands, but also about the right of people. And this is a big thing. You know, for years people sat in council meetings. Why didn't the council just say, you're in the wrong meeting? Which is basically what it boiled down to. But they didn't. They let them sit there for years in the hope of having 3 minutes to speak. They could have just said, oh, by the way, these councillors sit on this board. If you go there, you can have your 5 minutes to speak, or whatever it is. But they didn't. They just left the people to stay there. Right. It's also about the right of people in a democracy to ensure that the government itself is not above the law. So they go on, you know, in that sort of vein, which is quite interesting that the judge is interested enough to say all that. And it's really thorough. Then it goes on about the APA Act in Alberta to protect animals' interests, the right to be free from pain and suffering, provided with adequate food, shelter, space, and when ill, adequate care. So when we say adequate care, now this is a picture from 2022, the vet who said Lucy can still travel. You see the pressure sores? Right there, being talked about in here, and this was 2010. So nothing's changed for Lucy. In all these decades, with all these reports and everything's gone on, the line is held. Lucy gets nothing to improve anything. You know, and that's not me saying it. That's the vet reports, and all I'm doing is reading it. So, Right, what's the next bit say? So, I only highlighted the bit about PETA being involved in the court case because if we remember in the 2005 plan, it actually said get ready for PETA as part of the actual piece of paper in one of the things. So it was already accepted. We've seen this piece of paper before, and it's around here amongst all these millions of pieces of paper somewhere, that it actually says in the 2005 plan, page 36, that they knew they were going to have an animal welfare issue. So this, I don't suppose this was much of a surprise. The original notice alleged that the city is responsible for causing or permitting Lucy to be in distress contrary to the Act. So Lucy has been filmed. There is a film called The Elephant in the Room. I think it's around 2016, so 6 years after this, made by the CBC Fifth. And in it you can see Lucy when she's in a barn rocking backwards and forwards. I've got some film that I've seen in about 2021, and there's a few others that I've seen where Lucy is rocking backwards and forwards, and that is stereotypical behaviour, scientifically proven to be mental breakdown in elephants. So she has been seen in distress, whether or not it's deliberate or not, she's still been seen in it. Right, so the city was in according to the Chamber's judge, by seeking a declaration that the city was in contravention of the Act in a civil proceeding, the appellants were attempting to enforce the criminal law privately, and that's not how things go. And then there's pages and pages that say it as well. However, they didn't forget Lucy when they were writing this. Viewed through the animal welfare lens, this appeal raises important issues fundamental to the effective protection of animals in this province. Under what circumstances can citizens' advocacy groups be granted public interest standing to seek a declaratory judgment that the government itself has failed to comply with animal welfare laws? And it goes on about that as well. So they were actually using this to raise a really good point. So they then started actually talking more about Lucy and how this, affected her. So they did a whole thing about the historical and legal context of animal protection laws. Again, they were absolutely thorough about it, which is really impressive. It's a good point. Society's treatment of animals today bears no relationship to what was tolerated and indeed widely accepted centuries ago, or even probably 50 years ago. The concept underlying animal welfare legislation is based on the utilitarian principle that the human should avoid imposing suffering on animals, unless the result of doing so is greater pleasure for society than the pain it imposes. Well, that's a funny one, isn't it? Because we all see rodeo, especially in Alberta, and you see the pain. And obviously, there was a calf in this year's rodeo that had his neck crushed by the human competitor. So I think this is quite an interesting one, that this is actually something that's been said, that if society gets a greater pleasure than the pain it imposes, where do you go from there? The animal welfare model continues to be in the norm in Canada today. The federal government, under its criminal law powers, prohibited deliberate cruelty to animals. It's now so ingrained in our societies, it is considered a rule of civilization. But how society treats animals goes far beyond. And then it goes on and on like this, which all sounds good, really. But then they go on, about farming and science and research and everything. So, and then there's actually quite a nice statement here. With rights become responsibilities. One of them, we are stewards of the environment and all that kind of stuff. Also to the animals with whom we share the earth should moral, ethical or spiritual considerations not serve as adequate motivation in shaping legal obligations, which was a delightful paragraph to read in this. What flaws are there? Broadly speaking, criticisms fall into four main categories. First, it's argued existing laws are inadequate. Yeah, that's what I think everybody's thinking about Lucy. Second, at the heart of animal welfare always gives undue weight to human needs, no matter the purpose. You know, what constitutes improper neglect or harm to animals, as well as adequate care, continues to be understood primarily in terms of the interests of humans, i.e. Lucy being a zoo icon. You know, and just so we can put this into context, you know, that's Lucy's 70% of every day. I mean, you know, who would want their dog sleeping like that in that kind of corridor? You know, that's her daylight when it turns up. By comparison, because we're not anti-zoo, this is the zoo where Samantha went. Okay, look at that. Okay. So there was a real point there. Oh, one thing I will say is this can be Lucy's day. All right. So she's in pain, arthritic, she's got nowhere to move particularly, or she's parked there by cars on mown grass. She can't eat. There's no water there. You know, is it safe for her to be by cars? Is that a habitat? You know, and a little reminder, that's how other zoos care for their elephants. So this whole report here was kind of getting to that idea that if you are going to keep animals, you know, you have a responsibility, a huge one, I think is the kind of nutshell version of it. Then it goes on about Alberta's animal welfare laws. I mean, this is really in-depth. And the appellants allege the city has breached the act by causing or permitting Lucy to be in distress. Well, in this picture here, this was the Alberta wildfires a few years ago. So you can see the sky's orange behind, and Lucy is rocking backwards and forwards when we look at the actual film that accompanied this picture. We know that her lungs are not all that great. You know, what do we think the air pollution is going to be like that? She doesn't need to be there. There's her travel plan. 2 out of 3 vets in 2022 said she could travel. 2 out of 3. Right, so, and then it goes on about the Act does not simply prohibit causing or permitting distress, it goes further. So it does all these kind of things, ensures that animals adequate food and water, adequate care, reasonable protection from heat and cold. We think about Lucy out in minus whatever it is when she's out there like that. I mean, an elephant is a tropical animal. You know, when it goes below 7 degrees in many countries, they put blankets on elephants in sanctuaries. So the Act empowers peace officers. Now, as we've talked about this before, it's really hard to get a peace officer to actually take the complaint. You know, one day we hope times will change. So, from a practical perspective, the day-to-day enforcement of the Act in Edmonton is in the hands of the agent of the Minister of Agriculture and Rural Development. That is the Animal Protection Department of the Edmonton Humane. As we know, that doesn't really work and it will exist anymore. So, what happens? Now, the city, as the owner of the Valley Zoo, must comply with the zoo standards. So that's all written down here. And then it goes on to say animals must be maintained in numbers sufficient to meet their social needs, which we know Lucy isn't. The zoo operator makes sure animal diets of quality. Lucy's been obese her entire time there because she's got no exercise and she's been badly fed. That is in this report, the 2022, and all the other reports we've looked at, and they were the reports that were initially done for this. So we've done all that before. Right, so we've got all these sort of queries about, and the laws are pretty straightforward. So 4 key points may be drawn from Alberta's animal welfare. The legislation reflects public policy and the felt need and importance of protecting animals. Why are the rights of animals important? Animals over whom humans exercise dominion and control are highly vulnerable. They cannot talk, they have no capacity to consent, and all that kind of stuff. While animal rights in the province are not at the end of the spectrum advocated by some, Alberta legislator has nevertheless accorded animals the protection of certain rights. They do. They're pretty good laws. They really are. They would just be upheld. Animals, including Lucy, cannot commence lawsuits on their own to protect themselves. So, thus, courts should take a generous, not impoverished approach to the grant of public interest. 4th, animal welfare legislation is not simply for show. I think that's a really good thing. Then factual context relating to Lucy. Right then, before reviewing what the evidentiary record reveals about Lucy, I must address the city's argument the appellant's evidence should be ignored. So the city were trying to get all the evidence from the vets and the other zoos ignored, despite the fact that these are the leading world-class experts on elephants. It would have been really nice to see the city care so much about Lucy that they were really interested in what the world's finest elephant experts and vets had to say. You know, they could have really helped Lucy there. The appellants filed 6 affidavits, including sworn evidence from 4 doctors, an ecologist, an elephant biologist, an ethologist, and 2 vets. The city contends this evidence is irrelevant and inadmissible. Right, so the city's obviously trying to get rid of this court case. You know, that's what it says here. There can be no suggestion the city did not understand that abuse of process was squarely before the court. After all, it raised the issue itself. The city was also aware the appellants were seeking public interest standing, which is really hard to get when you read all the legal stuff. Public interest is not granted for trivial matters. It's not about whether Lucy got one less load of hay for breakfast one day. It's about an alleged sustained pattern of conduct over time and the city's treatment of Lucy contrary to what the law requires and the alleged serious consequences of that conduct. Lucy's interest, this is what it's about. So the city chose to file no evidence. It focused its submission that the only way the city could be held to account for the treatment of Lucy is in criminal proceedings under the Act, and it ought not to be deprived of its rights as a criminal defendant. Having put all its eggs into the criminal defendant basket, the city elected to adduce no evidence on the issues. The issues included the seriousness of the dispute as reflected in the city treatment of Lucy, the consequential impact on Lucy's health and treatment of elephants in captivity in zoos generally and the Valley Zoo in particular. And on it goes about all the issues as to why they think we should all keep quiet and not say anything about Lucy. Maintaining a militant silence was a strategic choice the city made. The city would have known that were it to file affidavit evidence, those swearing any affidavits on behalf of the city would be exposed to cross-examination. The city seeks to have it both ways, not file any evidence and avoid the risks inherent in doing so, and then demand this court ignore the evidence that's been filed by the appellants. This ought not to be permitted. What does it mean? Just this. At this stage of the proceedings, the evidence before this court on Lucy, her health problems and what caused or aggravated them is unchallenged and uncontradicted. So what did they chuck in there? Lucy's vet medical records. We've looked at those in previous videos. There's about 20 years of them. And there's the vet reports. And there are vet reports across the board, including the vet reports from, you know, that we've seen that say Lucy can't go, as well as all the ones that say Lucy can go. So I've really thought this was sweet when they put this in. Since animals cannot tell someone what's happened to them, relying on records relating to animals is often, as here, a necessity. As for reliability, that would typically be found to exist whereas individuals employed by the city are required by law to maintain records concerning Lucy's health, diet, exercise, all that sort of stuff. Ironically, by disputing the admissibility of these records, the city is in essence arguing that its own records are unreliable. But there is no evidence before this court to undermine those records. So that's quite interesting, isn't it? They're seeking to not have the records, Lucy's own health records, which were these were obtained by freedom of information. So these are proper records. These are, you know, really well kept by the zoo staff, you know, excellently kept. And this is what the people, you know, trying to get some action for Lucy, saying she's suffering, were using. And yet, I think what they're saying here is that the actual city didn't want those records used, even though they were their own records. You think they would want to rely on their own records, you know, if they really believed they were doing the right thing by Lucy. But that's just an opinion. So everybody's got to make their own. So then it goes on to say about the various records given by the doctors and, you know, them trying to get rid of some of the evidence supplied. It says here that, what does the evidentiary record reveal? It must be stress that the unchallenged affidavit evidence from the 4 doctors is accepted for the limited purposes of this appeal, that trial may ultimately resolve the facts otherwise. The affidavit evidence packs a powerful punch. I think that's an excellent statement. It holds up a mirror for all to see, provided one is prepared to look into the mirror. What it reveals is a disturbing image of the magnitude, gravity and persistence of Lucy's ongoing health problems and the severity of the suffering she continues to endure from the conditions which has been confined to, and those responsible for those conditions and that suffering. So, I mean, this is brilliantly written. You know, this is why it actually surprised me that, you know, it's kind of useful for people to learn this even now, you know, because Lucy's evaluations are still not being done to get her to a sanctuary, and she can go. You know, the Tennessee Sanctuary have said several times for several years they will take her. But you need to get the right vets involved to do it, because some vets just won't do it. They you know, fair enough, some people prefer zoos, some people prefer sanctuaries. But 2 years ago, they had the 2 reports that said, yep, we can move her, we will move her. And as I've shown you, those people presented the zoo and the council with a travel plan. So, what did it say about Lucy? Lucy at this point was 36 years old. An elephant's life expectancy is 65 to 70. What is it the zoo says? Lucy has been at the Valley Zoo since she arrived as a baby elephant from the Pinwala Animal Orphanage. What it doesn't say in here is that she was ordered from a wildlife dealer, but we've done that in a previous video. This is really interesting. She was housed by herself for 12 years. Then in 1989, Samantha, an African elephant, was brought to the Valley Zoo. Samantha, in records, is noted, also suffered stereotypical mental distress as well. But in September 2007, the city transferred Samantha to a zoo outside Canada for breeding purposes, once again leaving Lucy alone. Now, while we are really, really pleased for Samantha that she got away, this is how much Lucy and Samantha loved each other. That's how elephants really display love and affection. So they really loved each other. And when they were separated, Samantha actually hurt a trunk trying to get through the gate to Lucy. I mean, well done, Samantha. You know, she's one of those elephants there in a lovely place, and she's still alive. But this is something that I hadn't really thought about before. There's nothing in the record to indicate that the city was required by compulsion of law to arrange Samantha's transfer. Hence, a reasonable inference is that the city did this voluntarily, despite the fact the city would obviously have understood this would mean Lucy would lose the only elephant companion she's ever had. Absent the same species companion for Lucy, this amounts to Lucy having been kept in solitary isolation. Some might use the word solitary confinement. This is a judge saying this. This isn't advocates or animal welfare people. This is a judge that's recognising this. Since Samantha was moved away. Lucy's medical records reveal she currently suffers from a litany of painful, debilitating medical conditions that she's had endured for years. So all these conditions were in a young elephant. And when we read this, you know, how is this happening? You know, this shouldn't be happening. If the people, you know, had the right facilities and everything else, you know, but it is happening. And it was happening so often. And the zoo told us that that bullhook was not actually in Lucy's mouth. I mean, make your own conclusions. Right. So, one cannot ignore the fact that this evidence, which I again stress, is the only evidence before the court, indicates that Lucy's health problems have been caused or aggravated by her living conditions at the Valley Zoo, including her social isolation. Then it goes on about Dr. Philip Ensley. He was a zoo vet, 30 years experience. His report was bang on. Lucy's many health problems: arthritis, foot disorders, obesity. Lucy's, in particular, the concrete floor of an indoor enclosure, and confirms it is caused or aggravated Lucy's foot problems and arthritis, which she began when she was only 14 years old. I mean, that is diabolical. Dr. Ensley, the freezing cold temperatures in Edmonton during winter further aggravates Lucy's respiratory illness by exposing her to cold and limiting her to exercise. Lucy's unable to spend extended times in the winter months. That arguably means the city is required to take that into account, the size, composition and layout of Lucy's indoor enclosure. Well, Lucy's indoor enclosure, I mean, what is it? It's a little series of corridors. I mean, how's she supposed, I mean, look where she sleeps. I mean, what's she supposed to do in there? You know, that's where people get to do tricks. How's she supposed to exercise in there? Right, so, and then, do you remember the bed sores that I showed you from the 2022 report? Right, this is 2010. Recorded as early as 2002. Dental history. That's also in the 2022 report. You know, this shows decades that nothing changed for Lucy. And all they were interested in is getting this out of court and everybody being quiet. You know, but all these experts offered to help Lucy. They actually offered it. So, and they're all saying the same thing: severely confined living space, concrete. On this record, the city was responsible for Lucy's living space, concrete substrate and diet. Every single one says she's obese because the diet's so bad, but also because she can't move. Dr. Lindsay confirms that non-captive elephants rarely stand still for more than an hour or two each day. Typically on move for 8 and 20 hours. Lucy is locked up for over 16 hours a day. Right, and everybody knows this. In his view, Lucy's arthritis, foot infections are apparently caused by a lack of opportunity to move, stretch legs, take weight off feet and all that sort of stuff. Lucy's quarters are far too small. Then it goes on about the weight and how awful it is. Lucy maintains the way in which Lucy's exercise exasperates her problem. She's kept under tight control by the keepers during the walks. Well, we've seen that, haven't we? We see her surrounded by people and just parked, so people can take pictures of her, but that's it. There's a bull hook always there. You know, Lucy can't just roam around and enjoy herself and be an elephant. I'm not sure there's any other zoo animal there that is so restricted as Lucy. I'm not sure. Right, so that's about the walks, which we have talked about before. Then Dr. Paul raised a really good point, because there's always a thing where advocates say Lucy's, you know, housing and everything doesn't meet the guidelines, and then the zoo said it does. But the thing is, and this was quite a good point, that Lucy's situation is further compromised due to the fact she lives in such a cold climate and must be indoors on concrete most of her life. Elephants defecate 17 times in 24 hours. Now, you've got to remember, Lucy's never had lawful ventilation. You imagine the stench in that small space. And they urinate almost as frequently. Right, so captive elephants are often left standing in their own waste. I mean, that's disgusting. That's like a puppy farm dog in a cage that never gets mugged out. I mean, they do clean Lucy out, but only after 16 hours. Imagine the stench for her breathing. The law is all about context. So Lucy lives in a cold climate. To comply with the guidelines, it's arguable the city must provide Lucy with a substantially larger indoor living quarters heated appropriately. Well, Lucy's heating breaks down. So there's all kinds of really good arguments here that explains why, you know, each side, the zoo and the advocates, are saying two different things, because zoo says they do meet the guidelines. Advocates say, well, actually, there's all this as well. So it goes on and on and on about this. And also, in any event, ARSA guidelines confirm that antisocial behaviour of Lucy would have been non-correctable. Now, we're talking here about all this Lucy people have elephant stuff. We've moved on a little bit here. There's no evidence. There isn't any evidence. What we know, when she had Samantha, was she loved her. And it is said that by everybody in the scientific community that the people elephant thing doesn't exist very often at all, if ever. And even elephants in sanctuaries, if they want to be on their own, can be on their own. There's no reason to leave Lucy stood in her own waste for 16 hours a day in a small corridor. She can go and stand in a nice place in her own space if she wants it in a sanctuary. this smacks of blaming the victim for being held captive and all that kind of stuff. I mean, all this is in, you know, a brilliant judge's report. Lucy should be in the prime of her elephant life. She's not. Lucy suffers from numerous serious ongoing health problems which have been caused or aggravated by conditions. She's been confined for years at the Valley Zoo. You know, on this unchallenged record, the conditions of Lucy's confinement fall within the sole control and responsibility of the city. So again, it's all brilliantly, you know, done. So that's just legal info. You know, then they talk about a way to bring the issues involving Lucy before the court and that sort of stuff. I mean, so it goes on and on and on, but it's really, really good. There we go. More about animal welfare laws. Is there no one who can intervene? The city's saying there are other ways to do it. But as we know, the city makes much of what it claims it would lose if called on to answer in a civil, not criminal courts via Lucy. I mean, I don't really know why, because surely they can just all sit down and discuss what's best for Lucy, but I suppose that doesn't happen in courts. This case is not about what the city might possibly lose. It's about the people in a democracy and the animals they seek to protect. You know, so it's all really interesting stuff. You know, this is available online, all this stuff. For these reasons, the significance of this case goes far beyond whether the city has acted unlawfully in its treatment of Lucy. Of course, courts should be involved in courts should not be involved in micromanaging the city's day-to-day operations of the Valley Zoo. But that is not what this case is about. The city's treatment of Lucy over a number of years raises serious issues about the scope of the protection according to animals in our society, and who, if anyone, is entitled to access courts on their behalf to protect them from mistreatment, and on what basis. It also raises whether the executive branch of government may ever be held accountable by the people in the civil courts for non-compliance with animal welfare legislation. And I'll just do the little bit above it. At this stage, the city has adduced no evidence to refute the appellant's allegations on this front. In the absence of any evidence from the city, the evidence that does exist suggests a prima facie case that the city has, by a long-standing pattern of behaviour in the way in which it has housed, sheltered, exercised and fed Lucy at the Valley Zoo, caused or aggravated her equally long-standing health problems. So that's why this is important to read through this, because this actually backs up all the witness statements. So, and this is really interesting, I'm well aware that a private prosecution under the Act is possible in theory, but the Attorney General's agent has to date refused or declined to charge the city with an offence under the Act. Now, we've looked at Lucy being healthy and everything else, but they still don't want to do anything. So, okay, they're allowed to do that if they want to. But then it says here, it confirmed its review. The Humane Society had reviewed what Edmonton Valley Zoo handlers are doing to provide extra care and stimulation now that Samantha has moved. So Lucy's been placed on strict weight control problem. Well, we know from the 2022 report and the 2010 and 2016, Lucy's obese. So the strict weight control program didn't do very well. Structured exercise. Lucy is indoors 75% of her day. That goes against what we read earlier in this big report. She's not exhibiting stress. Well, she is, because it's actually in their own health records and it's been on film, including a TV documentary. Extra staff assigned to ensure she extra care and attention, they might well have done. Fatal to her health. Why do they say that? We've got all those top vets that say she can travel. There was only one vet that said she couldn't, and he was the one vet in 11 who said Alaska's elephant would die moving. Of course she didn't die. She enjoyed 20 years in sanctuary. It's puzzling why that vet was employed when there were 10 other vets that successfully moved elephants to sanctuaries. Right, and again, there are actually 14 in total. We looked at that in a previous video. Top experts, including the remarkable lecturer who has often spoken up for Lucy and said she will oversee Lucy's move. Exhibiting stress. Lucy does exhibit stress in the zoo. We've got film of her rocking backwards and forwards and looking stressed. She didn't get stressed the 4 transport times that Edmonton sent her to Calgary to get pregnant. Calgary reported that she arrived absolutely fine, travelled absolutely fine. There was no details of stress, so nobody's really sure on what basis they're saying she would get stressed travelling to a sanctuary. She didn't get stressed travelling to a zoo. She doesn't know where she's going. She's on a truck if it's a zoo or a sanctuary. Right then. So, after, on the record before this court, no further action was taken by Humane Society. With this respect, this reply to Zoocheck's complaint is problematic on several levels. First, it appears unresponsive to the essence of the complaint. The fact that Lucy might not be transported is irrelevant to the substance of the underlying complaint. The question is not whether Lucy can be moved, it's whether the city is in breach of the law by continuing to deprive Lucy of same-species companionship. Second, it is arguably no defence to the city's failing to comply with this obligation that Lucy cannot be moved. Third, assigning extra staff for Lucy or taking better care of her feet does not make up for keeping her in social isolation. Thank you, alleluia. Fourth, this reply does not appear to recognise the internal inconsistency in the city's position. On one hand, the city asserts that it's complying with the obligations to Lucy and she's not in distress, a position apparently taken at the time of the subject complaint. At the time, the city claimed that Lucy, only 32 years of age, was in such bad health she could not safely transport south to an elephant sanctuary. So, we have no evidence the concerns have been resolved. The uncontradicted facts here reveal that 4 years after the city removed Samantha from the Valley Zoo, Lucy remains by herself, socially isolated. And again, on this uncontradicted record, nothing has been done to deal properly with a number of the other complaints concerning the way in which Lucy is housed, sheltered by the city, except perhaps to put down some rubber mats, cover part of the floor in her indoor enclosure in sand. In fact, the city's treatment programme indicated that the recommendation to increase the indoor space available to Lucy during the winter months or install an elephant treadmill will be explored by a special committee. There is no evidence before this court as to what, if anything, the city has done. The elephant treadmill may have been an Oosterhuis recommendation, but he recommended that to Alaska. They put one in for Maggie and she collapsed on it. It doesn't suit all elephants, and Maggie then went to the sanctuary, travelled perfectly safely and enjoyed 20 years there. Might be a nice idea, but it doesn't work for all elephants. So the fact they didn't do that for Lucy isn't a big deal. But the fact that they didn't do the rest of it is a big deal. Right, so the situation is comparable to another case, and honestly they list so many cases in all this stuff. It's so thorough, but I won't bore everybody with it. So what it's saying basically is the Attorney General has effectively demonstrated through its agent, Humane, that it does not intend to do any prosecution. Right. So they weren't going to do anything because they were all sticking with their own side of things. The city claims the appellants do have other reasonable and effective alternatives. Write more letters. Well, we all know how that goes, don't we? I mean, there must be thousands of letters written over the years to councils, ministers. And what do? They just quote saying, oh, we looked into it and it's all right. Right, so hardly sufficient to say that the only option for citizens who sincerely believe the executive branch is acting unlawfully is to write letters. So the judge did recognise that. The city asserts the only remedy available to citizens basically is just to carry on writing letters. So the city's suggestion the appellants could seek to have the Minister of Sustainable Resource Development cancel the zoo's permit. Well, we all know that goes by writing letters. The history here, coupled with the unchallenged evidentiary record, makes it clear the appellants have no reasonable and effective alternative. So the judge recognised that the writing letters business doesn't work, and as you all know, it doesn't work. Right then it goes just on about pretty much the same stuff. Then this was the sort of pre-trial thing, is that it should go to a trial and an appeal. The appellants for the public and on behalf of Lucy are entitled to the day in court. The evidentiary record discloses Lucy lived alone in her enclosure for 12 years until 1989, when Samantha, an African elephant, was brought to the Valley Zoo. They lived together, even though they were different species and shouldn't mix. They still loved each other until Samantha went to North Carolina. When referring to animals, I can include only those that are sentient and those that feel pain or pleasure. An elephant is sentient. You know, they really went into this with all kinds of stuff. They really did. I mean, you know, they're talking about all the legal stuff, you know, how Lucy's been monitored, you know, by all the animal welfare places and all that kind of stuff, and lots of stuff about rules and regulations and trying to get justice in other cases. Even here, English jurist and philosopher Jeremy Bentham was one of the first to openly question humanity's claimed right to do with animals as it wished. As he famously suggested, the question is not can they reason, nor can they talk, but can they suffer? So the judge has really, you know, gone a long way here to talk about all kinds of cases and animal rights and animal science. Speciesism is in here, animal rights, can animals sue? I mean, it is tremendous what is in this report. Right, and then they're on about how the zoo permit is supposed to be issued only when all the guidelines are complied with. And then they're talking about record keeping standards, that the vets must document their treatment activities and all that kind of stuff. One thing to note is, and I checked at ABVMA recently, is although Lucy's records will be recorded, it is up to the owners, in this case the zoo or the council, on what medical information is given out. So if they tell the vets just to say, oh, Lucy's fine, the vets can't divulge personal information. They don't own it. That's the property of the council. So if anybody wants Lucy's medical records, you have to go through freedom of information to the council. Right, where have we got here? So again, they say that the evidence, all the reports from the vets and everything, are not hearsay. It's proper evidence. A word of caution: it'd be naive to assume that problems do not arise from the mere fact of keeping elephants in captivity. As explained by, that's one of the experts, wild animals by definition are no longer wild but captive. And this change in the environment itself causes substantial harm. While this may be so, it's not the issue here. The case is not about the harm caused to Lucy merely by holding her captive. It's about the alleged harm caused by the way in which he's treated while captive. The distinction is a critical one. Through the captivity dimension may raise causation issues relating to Lucy's health problems. What else have we got here? So, and they're talking about the arthritis. It was so young. Lucy was 14 years old. I mean, that just shows the privation. Lucy's long history of problems with feet, split, cracked toenails, nail bed or tooth, foot abscesses and infections. Remind me what it says on the Edmonton website about Lucy's feet. Right then, what else have we got here? Attributed to confinement, damp, cold, concrete floors, insufficient opportunity to walk for extended distances. It doesn't matter if Lucy chooses to go for an hour's walk or not. She should have the right to do so and the space to do so in a safe environment. This is what they're saying. You know, she's supposed to be out there for 20 hours a day. So if Alberta can't give her that, then they should let her go, is what I would say, personally. And I'm not sure what other people think, but we all are entitled to our own opinions. Right, then it goes on and on and on about all kinds of other cases. What's that? This was interesting. As noted earlier, there's a possibility under section 12.2 of the Acts of Courts restraining an owner from continuing to have custody of an animal following conviction, or even removing custody pending trial. So they did have the ability to, you know, get Lucy moved had it gone on. So this is, I mean, as I said, this is a full summary. It's absolutely remarkable what was said about it all. So I'll post the link with when I post the video. Have a good read, and I hope people find it interesting, and thank you as always for your interest in Lucy, and let's hope one day she gets her elephant hug again.